for staying with us on this channel. This is Law School Made Easy at Law School Made Easy 256. We thank you for subscribing. We thank you for liking and sharing our videos. And we urge you, please continue sharing, continue liking, and subscribing to this channel. Today, we want to look at consideration as one of the elements that govern or that forms a valid contract. Consideration tend to disturb students, so we want to go bit by bit, and in this video we are going to only focus on the types of consideration, and thereafter in our subsequent videos about consideration we shall do the privity doctrine alone, and then we handle the rules governing consideration, and then we shall go to Pino's case, and then we shall do a few cases one by one for students to understand. For example, London properties, we do Combe versus Combe, Thomas versus Thomas, and very many other cases one by one, such that we appreciate and like the concept of consideration. The Contracts Act 2010 defines consideration borrowing or using the holding that was in Churi versus Misa. And consideration literally now means that the interest, profit, or benefit that accrued for one party for bearance to detriment, loss suffered or undertaken by the other party. So in simple terms, consideration is the benefit and loss. That as you want to carry out consideration in any transaction, there must be somebody losing and somebody benefiting, and the vice versa is true. So therefore, there is a misnomer while handling consideration, that students tend to think that consideration is only about money. Yes, consideration can take the form of money, but also it can be an object. Consideration can be a service rendered that you can exchange and bargain for a service. It can be a promise made to do something. That is what we call consideration. Or it can take a form of a promise not to do something. So basically, that is consideration. You must know that as you enter into a business, there is somebody losing and there is somebody gaining. That is consideration. So as you make that contract, you finally want to make that contract, what is the consideration? Let's take a very quick example. If myself, Walter, I want to sell land, let's say to Marvin, and Marvin has money, has his money, and I have my land. So the consideration in this case is the land and the money. Someone is going to gain the money and lose the land, and the other person is going to get land and lose money. So that is what we call consideration. So let's dig straight into the types of consideration. We are going to handle this topic slowly by slowly, such that you understand and appreciate this concept. And we urge you, remind you to already subscribe and like our videos. So let's go to the types of consideration. We have three types of consideration, and one of them is executed consideration. In this type of consideration, all the parties, they have performed their obligation, their promises in the contract have been performed. Like the example I just gave, I sell my land to Marvin, and Marvin gives me money, I hand over my land to him. That is executed. All the parties have performed their obligation in the contract. Then another type of consideration is executory type of consideration. And in this type of consideration, what we must appreciate or know, that both parties promise to perform an act in future. They promise to perform an act in future. I'll give an example. Both parties promise that one party, for example, Walter promises to deliver a car or to sell a car to Marvin, and Marvin promises to pay after 2 weeks on delivery. So that is the promises made are in the future. So that is what we call executory executory consideration. Let's go where they want so much to ask in problem questions. The third type of consideration is the past consideration. And the general rule is past consideration is no consideration. Past consideration is invalid. Now, when your consideration is in the past, then that one cannot count. You cannot even sue, you cannot even move and enforce any contract where the consideration was in the past. That in the formation of an agreement, this is where the consideration is valid. But when an agreement is now finally formed, and then you bring something that we now want to call a consideration after an agreement or a contract has been signed, then that one cannot be a consideration, good consideration, and it is invalid. Or it can happen in this way, that somebody performs something without the knowledge of the person that they are performing for, that something they are performing, and then they come to demand. So if you perform when there is no contract, whatever you have performed was in the past consideration. Let's take a case on past consideration of Rascola versus Thomas. In Rascola versus Thomas, Thomas sold his horse to Rascola. And after they signed the agreement and agreed on the terms of the agreement, and the contract was now sealed, Thomas made a statement telling Rascola that that horse you're taking is free from vices. But when Rascola took the horse, it instead proved to be vicious. It had a lot of vices. So Rascola wanted to sue, and he sued. And his actions would not succeed because the statements of Thomas that that horse is free from vices came after they had sealed the agreement. Therefore, that was in past consideration. However, following very many general rules, there are exceptions to general rules, where we are saying that past consideration is no consideration, but in some instances where we have an exception, past consideration can be considered and can be valid. How? If it is at the request of the beneficiary. If the beneficiary comes to you and requests you to do something for them, and then later during performance they promise to compensate something, then in that way past consideration can be valid. Let's take a case of Lampley versus Braithwaite. In this case, Braithwaite killed somebody and wanted to get a pardon. So he asked Lampley to seek for a pardon from the king, who was staying very far. So Lampley invested in riding on a bicycle, going to the king's palace, to and fro, seeking for Braithwaite a pardon. Now, along the way, Braithwaite promised to pay $100 to Lampley for the service he was doing. So Lampley sued. When Braithwaite failed to pay, Lampley sued for the £100. Now, Lampley's case would not succeed because it was in past consideration, but because it was coming from the beneficiary, and the school of thought was that both parties, while performing this agreement, expected that there would be something in return. That was the expectation all through their performance. Therefore, Lampley's case stood and was successful simply because it was at the request of the beneficiary, and it is the beneficiary who had promised to compensate. So now I think here we are looking at the time. But anyway, when we get to Pino's case, we shall explain much of these concepts. So those are the three types of consideration. But also for consideration, look at the Re Mercado's case. Address your minds to Re Mercado's case. We want to thank you so much for being with us on this channel, and we ask you to always subscribe, and we can assure you our next video shall be about the doctrine of privity when discussing the topic consideration. Keep subscribing. Thank you so much. Thank you.